Hi, Jenny. Welcome to another episode of MoonLore. What are we talking about today?
Hi, Lori. We're talking about the full moon that's happening on May 26th.
Okay, and it is a Sagittarius full moon.
hmm
And the first thing we want to talk about is just think about the cycles, the lunar cycles. Every month we have a new moon. And at that point, the way most people think about the lunar cycles, a really easy way to think about it is by thinking about plant cycles. And the new moon starts the cycle. You can think of it as the time that you plant a seed. A week after the new moon, we come to the first quarter moon, which is suggested as a time of a lot of push toward growth. And then we come to where we are now, which is the full moon, which is a full illumination. You can think of it as the blossoming of what was planted at the new moon. And the new moon was on the 11th, May 11th
hmm
was the Taurus new moon.
hmm
And so now here we are 2 weeks later at the full moon. So do you want to open up the chart, or is there something else that needs to be said before we do that?
Let's just add in a couple more things. One thing that's important to know is this is a lunar eclipse.
Oh, yes.
So that means that the moon is going to be shadowed by the Earth. And that brings in some extra special designations that we'll talk about as we break this down. And I think the only other thing to think about is we're thinking about the 2 week cycle. So as Lori mentioned, like May 11th was our Taurus new moon, but we're also want to think about the 6 month cycle, especially because we're talking about eclipses. So on December 14th, we had a solar eclipse. So that was a new moon in Sagittarius, and it was a solar eclipse. So we're also going to be linking and thinking about that date as well.
Right. So
Um,
there's two different cycles we're looking at. We're looking at the little 1 month cycle, and then we're looking at the larger 6 month cycle, or
yeah.
actually year cycle, 1 month cycle.
Yeah, and our hope is that these are things that you think about in your personal life. So that just 2 weeks on the 2 week scale or 1 month scale of your personal life, but also the 6 months and 1 year scale. But we're also thinking about the bigger culture and society as well. So it's fun to kind of look at both of those, or interesting,
Yeah, it
if not
is.
always fun.
Not always fun, but always interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. So like let's grab that chart, huh?
Yeah,
Unless there's anything
let's
else.
pull up that chart and take a look at what we're working with
Okay.
here.
So here's the chart. I want to say this is the chart for the full moon. So the moon is exactly opposite from the sun, and just mention that the actual eclipse happens 4 minutes after this. So it's not, I just want to mention that just so for accuracy's sake.
Yeah.
But we really wanted to look at this full moon. So
Yeah.
there is our moon in Sagittarius. Like, so Lori, what do you think about the sun in Gemini and the moon in Sagittarius? Like, what are we looking at with those
I think
concepts?
about a lot of conversations about opinions.
Yep.
I mean, that's what I think about. The sun in Gemini is, Gemini is all about gathering information, and Sagittarius is taking that information and kind of reflecting it back in the opinions that are developed from that information
Mm-hmm.
in a real simple way. That's how I think about those.
Yeah.
How about you?
Well, I was thinking that it's a little bit like planning for a party. So the Gemini is going to do everything. It's going to write everything down and organize and make the invitations and get it out to everybody and blah, blah, blah. But then the Sagittarius, the moon, gets to go to the party.
Oh, and
Um,
have all the fun.
yeah. So that's kind of how the two work together. If you're thinking about, because we're talking about a polarity here, these two opposing forces, and really what you want to do is work to integrate both ends into something. And so that's one way to think about it, planning for a party.
Oh, I love that. I think that's a great little way to think about it. Yeah. You can also, you can think about the Gemini as the writing a book, and the Sagittarius as publishing that book.
Yeah.
They are two sides. Any polarity is two sides of the same coin. You can think of this as, primary education, this as, higher education.
Yeah.
Driving around town opposed to traveling to Europe.
Yeah, those are all great ways to think. So you can kind of see how they're connected, but they are in some ways opposite too.
Yeah.
One other one I thought of too was Sagittarius can be considered a sort of preacher or a missionary. So the Gemini is the piece that writes the sermon and is, you know, doing the nuts and bolts, and then the Sagittarius is the delivery of that sermon. So all of those examples kind of hopefully give you an idea of what Sagittarius in particular and Gemini are all about.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting. I want to bring in one other thing because you made me think of it by bringing up the party.
Yeah.
I always think of Sagittarius, a cartoon that I saw. I think I was a 12-year-old kid or something. I saw this cartoon of the centaur of Sagittarius coming to a crossroad. And there was a sign with an arrow pointing in each direction. And in one direction, it said enlightenment. You know, that's the Sagittarius part that always wants to see the big picture and get the big idea. So there's enlightenment in one direction, and the other direction, it was Gary's party. And you know, there's always that with Sagittarius. They want to see the big picture, and they want to just go to the party.
Yeah.
After
Yeah.
Gemini did all the work of creating the invitations and gathering the
Yeah.
people. Right.
Yeah. So yeah, that's sometimes where the rub is that Gemini is very detail oriented, and Sagittarius is like, I don't have time for that. I'm too busy having a good time. So you kind of need both to make it happen.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about this chart, I think, too, is like, so right off the bat, we're like, oh, information and very active and air and fire and all these things. But that's not really the story that this chart is telling. Yeah, sure, you have that Gemini. And I think I'm seeing this as kind of like, you know, things are opening back up, at least in the United States, with the pandemic. I know there's a lot of other things going on in other parts of the world, but I'm just going to talk about the US for a minute. Like everybody's kind of like, all right, cool, we can all get back together and have a good time. But some of you are probably finding out that it's not as easy as that. Like there's a lot of like difficulties, there's awkwardness, there's a lot of like things have changed and we don't necessarily know how to deal with it. So I kind of think that this chart speaks a little bit more to that kind of, wow, I don't know, I just want to go out and have a good time, but there's kind of these like weird obstacles, or I'm not really sure how to relate anymore. That's kind of what I'm seeing in this chart. Do you think that's a good summary, Laurie?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because this eclipse is on Wednesday the 26th. 2 days later, Mercury's going to go retrograde, and Mercury is you know, rules Gemini. So it really does. It's like, yeah, we want to go forward, but whoa, hold on. Yes. Hold on. There's still a lot to be considered, and it's going to, you know, retrograde over Venus, you know, really bringing in our values and what is important to us. How are we going to do this, getting back to anything that even resembles normal?
Yeah.
It's not as easy as we might think. And we've got friends and neighbors who have little children that can't get vaccinated. And, you know, how is that working into the mix? You know, there's a lot of complications.
Yeah. And in this chart, another way you can see that Mercury about to go retrograde is that the sun and the moon square Jupiter in Pisces. So I think what I think, so Jupiter expands anything it touches. So first of all, it's expanding perhaps maybe the desire for conversation or the desire for connection, or there's probably a couple different ways to interpret that. But in Pisces, it just brings in this like, okay, so now there's no boundaries and we've all been through this profound change and there's suffering and there's these other things. And we don't know how, you can't just chitty chat at the party about that, right? Like it brings in this depth that we haven't had to navigate in quite the same way before.
Yeah, the depth of the Pisces and the kind of overblown overindulgence of Jupiter. I mean,
yeah.
You know, it's like, I imagine, the way I imagine it is like, oh, I'm going to do everything like I used to, and I'm going to go out, and then it's like, oh man, I got to go back because that was way more than I could handle.
Yeah.
Because we've adapted to very different ways of being, and trying to be the way we were 2 years ago is not going to work.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it. I think because the other thing is, like, for those of you who are sort of astro nerds like we are, Jupiter's the old ruler of Pisces, so it's quite comfortable in Pisces. It suits, actually, if you think about Jupiter in the solar system, it's this giant sort of gelatinous planet. So it's not that it's not happy there, it's more just that I just keep thinking, like, we can't just think about ourselves. Like, we have to keep looking at the bigger picture, and it's asking us to do that, and it's not very comfortable. And not everybody in our friend group, we have all these differing opinions going on, and like there's a lot of like people pitted against each other, and it's not very clear, and it's not very comfortable for lots of folks.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and we have a lot of opinions about how other people are doing it too. I think that's part of that opinionization of the Sagittarius and the Jupiter. Yeah, we've got a lot of judgments around other people's opinions too.
yeah.
It's interesting, and it's not very comfortable. And yet that Jupiter squaring this sun and moon is the only real aspect that's being made.
Yeah, it's true.
Major aspect. One other thing I want to throw out there, just before I forget it, is if you look, you can use this as a way to see, how do we know if we didn't know that there was an eclipse? How would we know by just looking at the chart itself that this full moon is an eclipse? And by virtue of that answer, if you look at a natal chart, your own natal chart or someone else's, how would you know that there was an eclipse going on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You would know that because the nodes are right beside the sun and the moon. That's how you know it's an eclipse, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's great.
Just to give you that.
Super good information. Yeah, I mean, I think the other two reasons. Well, I was thinking, so at the new moon when it was Taurus, and Taurus really is all about slowing down. As an earth sign, it doesn't want to move quickly. It wants to be tactile and sensual and slow down. And I think a lot of it is being tied in with just Mother Nature in a certain way. And so at that time, it was kind of like, hey, everybody, we need to slow down. Like find a sense of serenity and reverence perhaps, and slow down at that new moon. And so 2 weeks later, you have what appears on the surface to be sort of a hyperactive, here we go into Gemini and Sagittarius, but actually it's underscoring that need for slowing down because of what we said with Jupiter. The Mercury retrograde is also squaring Neptune. And it's already squared it a couple days ago, and then it's going to do that 2 more times. So that's also the symbolism of, actually, you know what? It's retrograde, it's squaring Neptune. Like things are they're not going to move forwards in a straight line. And so that's kind of why we're saying a lot of these things. So I think, so that's part of it, is think about whatever seed you planted for slowing down. At least that was my take on it. And what are you seeing now? If you did that, has it benefited you? How is it preparing you? And if you didn't do that, same thing. How's it impacting you? Do you see the need for that now?
It really is interesting, given that this is, just a few days into the beginning of Gemini season, and how we do tend to think that Gemini season is going to be all kinds of activity and mental activity. And it's so interesting with Mercury squaring Neptune 3 times during Gemini season. You want to really think about how can you use that in a way that's going to benefit you, instead of looking at it and going, oh my God, we're going to be so confused all month and we're going to make all kinds of stupid mistakes because we can't see things clearly. And, Neptune just suggests this, things are not as they appear to be kind of thing. Like we're going to just be wandering around for the entire Gemini season in a state of confusion. Well, how can we use that instead? We can listen to a lot of good music, we can write poetry, we can spend extra time on our meditation cushion, we can, what other kind of things does that make you think of, Jenny? Anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you can still go out and do your sort of routine, like go on your walks, but see if you can like just change your attitude a little bit or tone it back a little bit, and think of, if you do like to go on walks, like think about connecting with nature on that walk more, like noticing flowers on your path, noticing trees, noticing birds that are singing, that kind of thing. And just, it's really just opening the door to things beyond yourself. And it gives you a chance to have more of a sense of a retreat in your day to day. Like you don't have to go on some big expensive retreat. You can bring it right into what you're already doing. It's just about a little bit of an attitude switch or an opening of the mind to
I
a
like
new
that.
thinking. Yeah, it
I
doesn't have
like
to be being
that.
complicated. So
And I really like it too, because, here where we live, in Eastern time, all of these planets, the Sun, Mercury, and Venus, are in the 12th house too. So that even more highlights that for
mhm.
us, that 12th house focus of slowing down, paying attention to things that are coming in on a different level.
Yeah. And the other thing that makes me say that, that ties in with this chart is too, is that Mars is in Cancer. And
Mm.
it's, and I certainly can experience like Mars and Cancer as being sort of grouchy and very self-protective. But it's also like, get fierce about your self-care, get fierce about nurturing and nourishing people around you, like make that happen, is a way to look at that as part of this whole picture of how can you find renewal? How can you retreat a little bit? How can you, I know Laurie always likes to talk about, you always talk about those to-do lists of like the things that you need to just finish. Like don't start anything new. Like give yourself the time to find completion in some things that you started. And that's what this period can do for us. Yeah.
And it really does. There's some wonderful gifts available here. I think with that, exactly, allowing yourself to listen to things from a different perspective, to, take some action on your imagination, your spiritual life, your ability to hear the trees sing.
I love that. Yeah. Well, I think the final thing that we need to mention here, the elephant in the room, is a little bit about the eclipse. Don't you think, Lori?
Yeah, and you had some awesome stuff to say about the eclipse before we started recording. I want to hear if you can repeat some of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Can I repeat anything I said? Well, I think what came up for me was just tuning into the fact that the December 14th date we mentioned was a solar eclipse. Sorry, I'm stumbling there a little bit. Was a solar eclipse, and at that time we talked about endings. Rather than starting something new at that new moon solar eclipse, we talked about consciously closing the door on unfinished business, letting some things go, releasing things that weren't serving you. So in that light, we're thinking about this full moon and lunar eclipses kind of being like, what did I let go of, and what have I allowed room for by letting go of those things? What am I seeing by the light of this full moon, that I've because I removed those things out of my life? What am I allowing in? And that's kind of part of that's when you sort of empty the cup so that it can be filled back up.
I
Um,
love how you said that, like, emptying something, and then at the full moon, you filled it. What have you filled it with? I think that's a really powerful consideration. You look back to the middle of December, what was being brought to completion in order for the new cycle, and what have we filled it with since then?
yeah.
I think
And
that's
then,
a really interesting contemplation.
oh, yeah, thanks, Lori.
I love
It was fun to talk about it. I mean, I think, and then and you throw the kind of Sagittarius into the mix, I do think this is about vision, and kind of broader vision, and seeking wisdom and those kinds of things. Because of the lunar eclipse, you have to think about, here's this bright moon in the sky, yet it's being occluded by the shadow of the earth. So I think it's just, there's a different view happening. It's not a normal full moon where everything's, you can really see by the light of the moon. It's more like, I don't know, you see different forms and different lights. It's almost like what you see in ultraviolet or infrared or something like that versus normal light. There's just a different perspective that you have. And so what is that? It's
It's the
tuning into
same
that. What is
thing
that?
being illuminated, but it has a different filter on it.
Yeah. It's like
Huh.
seeing, what is it? It's like black light, and then you're with your like cheesy glowing posters in the
Right.
80s, like the velvet poster is a little bit like that, like something new that you can witness and see based on the work you've done. The work you did it for slowing down 2 weeks ago, the work you did 6 months ago of closing out something consciously.
That's wonderful. I like that. I'm going to have to give some thought to that. So what houses do these fall in your chart?
Well, the
Or
moon
am
is
I
in the
moving
sixth
ahead too
house.
fast?
No, this is good. It's in the sixth house for me. And it's funny because I haven't really considered where this is impacting me, but this is definitely about my commitment to self-care that I've needed to do. Just taking a look at like, where are things that my health is a little out of balance. And it wasn't anything crazy, but just tuning in and like I'm getting massage this week. There's a couple other things, but yeah,
Wow.
that's kind of what I think about. What
That's
about you, Lori? I think I know where this is landing for you.
Well, the moon is in my fourth house. It's family. There's some big stories in there, I'm sure. But yeah, I think it's important for all of us to look at where it lands in our chart. And if you're using whole sign houses, it's very easy. You start at your rising sign and look for that symbol of Sagittarius. And it's the house that follows that where this full moon is happening. So yeah, for me, it's like something being illuminated from the early home life, the early family, or seeing it in a new and different perspective from the light of day
Mhm.
of the sun's reflection on that full moon. It's
Mm.
interesting. So yeah, think about that. What are you seeing more clearly in the face of what you began 2 weeks ago or what you closed out in order to begin 6 months ago?
Mhm. Yeah, great.
Yeah. Okay.
Good. Okay. Well,
Anything else, or are we all clear?
I think we covered it.
All
So,
right. Well, thank you, Jennie, for another MoonLore video. We'll do it again in another two weeks.
sounds good. Thank you very much, Lori.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.